Hello guys, welcome back, and today we're going to be talking about the Minnesota Wild versus the Winnipeg Jets series. We'll be talking about the games and what happened in them. Now the Jets won yesterday and are advancing to round 2. They won in 5 games to beat the Minnesota Wild, and overall it was a fun series to watch. This is probably one of those series I got to see the most of out of these first rounds, but it was a fun series to watch. It was back and forth, not really too close as we could tell, but it was still, the games at least were really fun to watch, really energetic too. Now my prediction was for the Winnipeg Jets to beat the Minnesota Wild in 6 games. That was close-ish, so I'll give myself a pass on that one. Now we'll go for the games to start out. So we'll start with game 1. The Wild lost 2-3 in Winnipeg, and that was a great game to watch. It's probably the game that I watched the most of in the series, but overall, that was a fantastic game to watch. I think Minnesota started off fantastic, and then Winnipeg just steamrolled them in the second and third period, and it was a good game. It was a very good game. It was close throughout, and Winnipeg just squeaked out the win there, but overall, that was a fantastic game to watch. The offense was going, the defense was good. It was just a high-flying, highlight reel game, and that's what I like to see. That's a fantastic game, and it was great to watch. Now in game 2, the Jets came out and played fantastic, winning against the Minnesota Wild 4-1. That's probably the game that I watched the least of in the series, but it was still entertaining when I watched it. But Winnipeg in that game was amazing. I mean, they were just rolling. I mean, after that second period in the first game, they were just rolling. And Wild really didn't have anything for that. I mean, they were still playing okay, but again, not good enough to match up against Winnipeg. Now in game 3, of course, is the first game in Minnesota. Minnesota came out to play. It seemed like they just flipped their style from that second game. They were just amazing. They were blasting out of the gate. They were doing fantastic. Minnesota got a goal or two, getting it 6-2, but Minnesota throughout the whole game was just consistently good, and I think that Minnesota just came out to play in home ice. They were determined, and they got it done. Then we go to game 4, and you think Minnesota, kind of getting that momentum from that game 3, scoring 3 goals in that. No. In game 4, the Winnipeg Jets beat them 2-0. So the Minnesota Wild scoring 6 goals in game 3, 2-0 in game 4. And that's probably my biggest complaint with Minnesota, at least in this series at least, is their just inconsistency on offense. I mean, they were good in the first period of the first game, then the rest was just terrible in that Minnesota trip. And that Winnipeg trip. And then they go to Minnesota, score 6 goals in their home ice, and then the next game in Minnesota, they score 0. I mean, the inconsistencies are there, and they're a huge problem for Minnesota. And then in game 5, the Winnipeg Jets are back at home, and they score 4 goals in the first period and can cruise to a win there. And they win the series. They win that game 5-0. And of course, Minnesota looking inconsistent once again, as they're absolutely atrocious in that game. Of course, starting terribly. That isn't really a good momentum shifter. And the Winnipeg Jets win their first series, well, technically, they had their first game ever in the playoffs, but their first series win in the playoffs history. It was pretty obvious now that they kind of had to win a game in the playoffs. It was pretty obvious with the team that they had, but I think a lot of people expected them, including me, to get past that first round, and they've done that, and they could go a long way as well. I mean, Minnesota is up 3-2 against Colorado, but Colorado won their last game in Nashville, so Colorado going back at home, they could surprise Nashville and actually advance to the second round. That would be huge for for Winnipeg, because if you're facing Colorado in the second round, that's a much better opponent to face than Nashville in the second round. Now, even though Winnipeg scored a lot of goals, I don't think it's his fault. He did play pretty well in that first game. He was lighting it up. But throughout the series, I don't think it was necessarily his fault. Even in the 5th game where they scored 4 goals in 1 period, there's a lot of unlucky bounces for Minnesota. And I think that Dubnyk overall played good. Didn't play fantastic, but good enough. And I think that Winnipeg was just having so many chances after chances, that the Minnesota Wild were giving up. Their defense was just bad. I think that Minnesota or at least Winnipeg was definitely converting on that and scoring on goals. But I don't think that it was necessarily Dubnyk's fault. He still played relatively well, at least in my opinion. I felt like Minnesota's defense was pretty bad throughout. I mean, losing Suter is a big blow, but I thought their defense could handle that. Leaving that, I thought their defense was still decent after that, but Winnipeg's offense was electric. They were fantastic, and they were making a lot of stuff happen, and Minnesota Minnesota just was not looking good at all throughout this series defensively, but Winnipeg was looking great almost every single game offensively, and they were lining it up, and they were just making lots of chances, getting a lot of shots. And I think Minnesota, I think there was a stat where they had like the least amount of shots of any team throughout the whole playoffs so far, and if you're in that stat, if you're in the bottom, it's not looking too good for you. And of course for Minnesota, having Parise and Suter out again with injuries is just a gigantic blow, and always is for them. I mean, just for Parise, he hasn't had a full season of hockey in 6 years, and he's getting paid $7 million for like 10 more years or something ridiculous for that. Minnesota, that contract, I never understood that, but having him injured and not having him play a full season in 6 years, not looking too good. But man, the Winnipeg Jets showed up at home. One of the biggest storylines, of course, the Winnipeg wideout showed up too, as that crowd was electric. Arguably the best crowd in the NHL right now, especially for the playoffs. They were amazing. The crowd was amazing, and you could see even out of the stadium, the crowds that were gathered around the stadium were insane, and that definitely helped the Jets, I believe, as that home ice advantage definitely showed up for them. And for Winnipeg, I see everything working right now. They have the depth scoring, they have the star scoring, they have the defense, they have goaltending. Everything is really coming together for them. And let's say they face Colorado in the second round, that's going to be I'd say an easy cakewalk for them, because they're working everything right now, and they are arguably one of the best teams in the NHL right now, and they're just the better team overall for Winnipeg over Minnesota. I think everybody saw that coming. They were just the better team throughout the whole series, and with exceptions, of course, at Game 3, I think that overall their consistency has really showed up for this round, and for rounds to come. But the Jets, man, they are scary good, and going on the second round, they can do anything. They got control their destiny, and they can go past the second round. They can go past the third round. They can win the Stanley Cup. They have the team to do it. It's all about what they do from here on out. And for Minnesota, I don't know how good the golfing is in Minnesota, but I'd say it's pretty decent. I mean, it is still winter, so you might get some snow, but overall, the golfing quality might still be there. I mean, who am I to talk? I'm a Dallas Stars fan. We've been golfing since March. But overall, it was a fun series to watch, and I'm hoping that you guys got to see a lot of it, because, again, it was a fun one to watch. It's going by both sides, but of course, Winnipeg got the best of them. This is similar to the LA Kings Vegas series, where it was still entertaining. Not the closest series in terms of the games played, or at least the wins, but overall, it was an entertaining series, and for the most part, pretty competitive. So that's going to be, guys. Like and subscribe to not ring that bell, and tell me down below what you think of the Winnipeg Jets and the Minnesota Wild series, and what you think of the Minnesota Wild going into round 2. I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.